So as we said, we have the value type and the reference type. And the methods that we've used so far have been used the by-val keyword, which is related to the value type. But we also have what's called a reference type. We're going to look at the difference between these in a second. But VB arrays are reference types. So value types are what are called primitives are value types. Primitives are these things here, which are simpler than things like buttons and arrays and generally objects. So these things are much more complicated type data structures, whereas these are pretty simple. So it turns out that they decided, the people who developed the language decided to handle these types in a slightly different way, or in a different way than these types. And so we want to explore that a little bit. So, so reference types are for arrays and other things like that, and they are managed in a slightly different way using what are called pointers. But he says for now you should focus on the main behavior differences. So not like the theoretical differences or the underlying differences, but how they behave differently. So he says that when an array is passed into a method, and we just looked at that before, right? We passed this temp array, or in actual fact we used it up here. We passed this friends array into this subroutine. So even though we use the by-val keyword, actually, still, since friends is a reference type as opposed to a value type, it gets handled slightly differently. So he says when an array is passed into a method, the new local name is a reference. So before going on with this discussion right here, let's take a look at an example. So here I have a form, and I'm going to have two buttons. One is a subroutine using the by-val keyword, and one is a subroutine using the by-reference keyword. If I double-click on it, so I'm going to create two very simple subroutines. Here's a subroutine. Here's the signature for this subroutine. And here's the signature for this subroutine. They have different names. One is add one by using by value, and this is the same basic idea, but it's add one by reference using the by reference. And let's look at the signature. So we can see what this is going to do. It's going to take one integer as an input, and it's going to do something with that integer, and you can see what it does. What does it do? It increments it by 1, right? And this is going to do the same thing. This is going to take an integer, and it's going to increment it by 1. So the only difference between these is this keyword and this keyword. And their names are slightly different, BV and BR. But they both seem to do the same thing. They both add 1 to whatever we input. So if we input something that's equal to 100, we would expect that it would add 1 to 100, so it would become 101. So I'm going to use this one in button click 1, in button 1, and I'm going to use, so you can see it here, BV by value, and then I'm going to use this one, BR, in here in button 2. Okay, so let's see if they do the same thing. So in other words, I'm going to call this function that I defined up above here in button click 1, and I called button 1 by val, and I'm going to call the other one, the by reference one, in button click 2, which is this one. So do they do the same thing or not? So we changed only one thing. This was by val, which is the way we've always done it so far, and this one is by ref. Now, this is not related to passing an array, because these are not arrays. I'm just trying to illustrate this idea of by val, or by value and by reference, the difference between these two concepts. And then maybe that will help us understand what it means to say that an array is a reference type and a primitive is a value type. So, but it's not exactly the same thing, actually. Anyway, let's look at this. So I'm calling it here and I'm calling it here, and then I'm checking to see what x is. So after I call this function, in this button click 1, I'm checking to see now what is x. And then I do the same thing here, but I'm calling the br function here, and then I'm checking to see what x is. So you would think that x would be the same in both cases, and we would expect that x is, what would you expect that x would be after I run this function, and then after I run this function? What would you expect x to be? So probably you would expect x to be 100. So let's try it and see what happens. So if I run this one, x started at 1, I'm sorry, did I say 100? Probably you would expect x to be 101. So let's see. But x is not 101 when I do the by val version. But it is 101 when I do the by reference version. So there's something different here. So what is it? So what happened? So the way they explain this is that when you use by val, what happens inside the function is it makes a copy of the original variable that you put in there. So it doesn't work on the original variable. It's already made a copy of it, and it's working with its own copy. It's separate from the original variable. So any changes that you make to this this variable inside the function are not reflected in what's in the original variable. So here the original variable is equal to 100. Then we do something here, and you would think, oh, well, we just incremented x by 100, but we're not incrementing the original variable, this variable, by 100. We're making a copy of it inside our function because we used the by val keyword. Up here, we used the by val keyword. So we're making a copy of it inside our original, we're making a copy of it inside our function, and then we're adding 1 to that copy. So that the thing is that that's all happening inside the function, and it's not affecting this variable. Okay, so that now when I say show what this variable is here, it hasn't been affected by what happened here, because I was only playing with a copy inside here because I was using the by val keyword. That's the effect of the by val keyword, is that you're only playing with a copy of the whatever you input, not the original one. On the other hand, if you use the by ref keyword, which is what I did here, and then I used it here, now I'm affecting the original one, because we say, or they say, that, or by ref makes a reference to x, so it's kind of like pointing at x. And so inside the method, it works with this reference, or this thing that's pointing to x. So if it changes x, it's actually changing the original x because it's pointing to x. It's not a new copy that it can play with by itself. It's pointing to the original x. And so it makes changes to the original x, and thus x became 101. So that's the explanation. So that's the difference between ByRef, between ByVal and ByRef. So ByRef doesn't make a new copy to play with. It works with the original one. So you can see that in this case, I'm using the by reference. I'm going to increment by 1, and then this thing is going to be shown here, and it's going to be incremented by 1. But in this case, this thing is not affected by what happens in here because this was by val. So that's the point, is that by val makes a copy and plays with that, whereas by ref doesn't make a copy. So again, we can see it. If we do it here, you can see here it didn't change it to 101 because it made a copy and played with it. But here, it points to the original one, and so when it increments it by 1, it increments the original one, and so it does change to 101.